All right. We are talking about the atmosphere and weather and climate. And one of the most important parts of the global climate is the greenhouse effect. And there's this myth that the greenhouse effect is bad because people tend to associate the greenhouse effect with climate change or global warming. And while they're definitely related, it's important to remember that the greenhouse effect is actually something that we need here on Earth, because without it, if if the greenhouse effect didn't exist, then we would not be able to live here on Earth. It would be way too cold. And so the greenhouse effect is actually a good thing because it warms the Earth enough for life to live here on Earth. And so the greenhouse effect is caused by greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And these greenhouse gases are water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And those four gases are super, super important for you to remember. So make sure you make note that you know those four greenhouse gases. So again, water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And so these greenhouse gases allow radiant energy, or right, the sun's light, to pass through to the troposphere and hit the Earth's surface. And the Earth's surface will absorb that solar energy and transport it into infrared radiation, or heat. And so that heat then rises into the troposphere where the greenhouse gases actually absorb that infrared radiation. And some of that infrared actually escapes back into space, and some of it actually gets re-emitted and warms our troposphere, which again allows for life on Earth because it warms the Earth to a livable temperature. And so here's a little picture to show you guys, again, the same exact process I just explained. So here we have our light energy coming down, coming through the atmosphere. The Earth's surface is absorbing this and transforming it into heat, or infrared radiation. And this infrared radiation is escaping. And here you can see some of it's escaping, but also some of it is getting reabsorbed by this is getting absorbed by the greenhouse gases here in the atmosphere and re-emitted to back down onto Earth. And so here you see a nice healthy greenhouse effect, natural and good. Whereas over here, if you have an increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases, then what's happening is that not as much infrared or heat can escape the atmosphere, and instead more infrared is actually re-emitting down into our troposphere, warming it more than it should. And so that's where we get global warming or climate change. These terms are used interchangeably sometimes, but they're actually not the same. So global warming has to do with the rise in average global temperature, whereas climate change is kind of like an umbrella. So global warming falls underneath that, but right, it's raising global temperatures, altering precipitation patterns, sea level rise. There are so many things that are happening in climate change due to this increase in greenhouse gases, which we will talk about ad nauseum in the very near future. And so obviously the greenhouse effect affects our global climate, but here we are going to look at some things that affect our local climate. And so one of the things that's super important is that large body of waters actually really influence what happens on land. And so water has what we call a high heat capacity. And so what that means is that heat is absorbed and released very, very slowly by water, whereas land, it happens a lot quicker. And so this gives us wind patterns that influence local climate. And so as you can see here in the day, when you're standing on a beach during the day, I know that's when I like to go to the beach, you can feel a breeze coming off of the ocean. And it's so, so nice. But there's a reason for that breeze. And the reason is that the land heats up a lot during the day, and that land being warmed ends up warming the air above it. And that warm air, as you know, because you are convection experts now, that the warm air will rise, and that cool air coming that's over the ocean will actually come in to replace it. And so you end up with this convection cell, which causes a nice cool breeze in the direction towards the land. And so we call this a sea breeze because it's coming from the sea. And at night, the opposite's happening. And so, relative to the land now, right, the land loses heat very, very fast, and the sea is relatively warmer than the land. And so, the sea is now warming the air above it. That warm air is rising. The cooler air from the land is coming in, and it's creating this lovely convection cell again, and this time the cool breeze is coming in from the land over the sea. And so we call this a land breeze. Another factor in local climate has to do with mountains. And so oceans have lots of moisture, and so as the prevailing winds are blowing, they are picking up moisture from the ocean. And so it drags this moisture across the land until it hits a mountain. And the wind, where the wind is coming in, is called the windward side of the mountain. And that windward side of the mountain experiences a lot of precipitation because as the moist air reaches the mountain, it actually ends up cooling and rising and condensing until it can't take it anymore and releases that moisture in the form of precipitation. And so all of the precipitation ends up, well, not all of it, but most of the precipitation or most of the moisture ends up falling out on the windward side of the mountain. And as the air rises and comes to the other side of the mountain, the leeward side of the mountain, or the side facing away from the wind, that air mass is actually descending and warming, but it has very little moisture. And so you end up with very hot, dry habitats. And so if you were to look at the a map of the United States, right, we have the Pacific Ocean over here, and we have, let's say, California along here, and then you have the Rockies, and you have the Southwest on the other side of the Rockies, and that's why you end up with this dry habitat on the other side. And so this is called a rain shadow effect because there is a shadow of rain when it hits the mountains. So we're going to stop here, at least this video.